right, so week 10, my friends, we are on to our next code up for the coffee run from Big Nerd Ranch. And this code up is two chapters. So, first chapter we cover Bootstrap and introduction of jQuery. And then in the second one, continuing the jQuery and writing pure JavaScript for the form processing. And when I originally set up like the points, how much we were going to cover in each week, my thinking was this, and you're going to have a varying experience of this. Is my hope is that the bootstrap chapter should go pretty fast, but it may not. And here's why I say this: is that if you've taken my CIT82, we cover Bootstrap, and students get the experience of creating a Bootstrap site from a template. So exposed to the way Bootstrap works, exposed to the classes that are used in Bootstrap. But if you haven't had Bootstrap, it might make that a little more challenging. And I've said this before, I think here, but one thing that's important, one thing that I think is good about the way we layer some of the content between what Todd teaches and the way I cover it is that I love that Todd teaches the pure platform way of handling what Bootstrap does for us. Now, the reason is that these days you can, and this is also true for jQuery because that's the other thing that gets thrown into this mix. And in hindsight, I think I would have asked the guys who, at least because I know one of them who did this book, is to consider the next version as taking the Bootstrap and the jQuery out. And I understand why they did it. They did it so that they could focus on the pieces of JavaScript that they were trying to help students understand or help readers understand. So I get why they did it, but I also think these days, let me give you an example, and the book talks about this, is that when they implemented, you implement the jQuery on, which is the equivalent to add event listener, the popularity of jQuery came out of the fact that it was so easy to access and update the DOM because JavaScript in the prior versions made it really more challenging. So jQuery's popularity attributed to the changes we saw in JavaScript, like query selector all. That's a direct result of the JavaScript community. In this case, the bodies that are in control of the base language is updating that. So here's my point about this. It's good to learn some amount of jQuery and Bootstrap because you're going to see them out in the wild. Now, hopefully, you're going to learn over time how to create this stuff without those two frameworks because it allows you to make sites that are written to the platform and run much more efficiently. And at the same time, it's kind of interesting to see Bootstrap and jQuery, their newer versions, become much more lean and less impactful. So these are really two great chapters, I think, but there is a lot here. So it ended up taking me a little longer than I thought to get through it. And part of the reason was when I got to the form handling, I got a weird error that it wasn't, when I went to actually implement the form, the calling the form method, that it was actually creating an error that was not in the book and it took me a while to backtrack. So the other thing I would say to you is when doing this work, obviously I have points of commits that you need to do along the way, and obviously I have questions to make sure you understand these concepts. But when you get an error that is not what the book is saying should happen, take that time to really start getting your troubleshooting skills honed up, because this is a really powerful skill to have, is the ability. It took me a little longer than I would have thought, but I said, well, that's the nature of it, mostly because I didn't have that time to dedicate it to it, and I was pulled between tasks to do it. And so once I actually sit down and focused on it, I was able to, and by the way, all two things that really helped out here was learning how to run debug in the dev tools, and also looking at the app object that's created on the global space. Those two things helped me really see where the error was. And I'll tell you what it was is in the data store, and I don't know when this happened. I could go back and look at my commits, but window.app, capital A, was a lowercase, so it wasn't registering my methods on the object. And so it was not fun at the time, but in hindsight, it's always good to learn these troubleshooting skills. So let me turn over and just show you what the work you have to do for this week. So the one thing, and I really want to emphasize this, right? So is to document your code, because that is a way. I mean, the answers to my questions are the way I go through and document my code in a sense, because what I'm doing is as I'm coding and as I'm reading the book, I come up with questions, but I want to see you documenting the code for your own benefit too, because when you go to take these concepts and recreate them in your own app concept, which is something I'm thinking about how we're going to do this for this round. But this is really helpful to read your own documentation because it's your understanding of what that code's doing. So a few more points, commit points here, and a few more questions. So again, in your answers MD markdown file under week 10 heading, answer the questions that I've posed here. And towards the end, I actually just because I had to end up getting through this, I didn't do the last, which is, you'll probably see this as you come in here, because on the last part where you register the create order as a submit handler, and really what that's doing is when you hit submit on the form, so prior to the last part of this where you're just outputting into the console, they then bind the create order for the truck in the truck method or the truck module to actually write the order. And this is such a great step, this last one. But, and FYI, I kind of trailed off of here because you may see that. So the other thing, so that's what you need to do, right? So for this one, so let me come back here and finish up. So what I've been thinking about is two things. One thing is, one student asked me a really great question that I've been figuring out how we're going to do it. But he, in this case, as he was answering the questions, he wanted to see, what the actual correct answers were. And so what I was thinking, it would be really great, and I'll figure out somehow next week for us to share, and maybe I'll do it on attendance, maybe. I'm not sure. We'll have to figure that out, because the next thing I need to do is actually take what we've done here, look at JavaScript, the weird parts, and come up with something, because for the last two code ups I've actually had to create something of your own based on these concepts. So I need to kind of take all this and figure out what we're going to do next. But I know one of the things I want to do, and maybe attendance would be good, because all you'd have to do is cut and paste, and there's not so many of us that it would be hard to look through to see the different ways we've answered, at least because now this will be the third time. So maybe what I'll have you do is do the first two and your answers for this, so we can kind of just take a moment there to look at those. So anyway, that's the thing. And the other thing is that for the last item, which was the challenges, I ask you to think about, right, how we would handle if you were interested in taking that concept of your develop 1 and 2 and actually implementing it in this module object method concept coding pattern. So I'm still thinking more about that, and I was actually almost thinking of, as we do it, having you implement these concepts into your app, and then when we get to the final 4 weeks of this class, have you create something different. But again, I'm going to look at your feedback, reflect on that, because it's all good. Really, it's just a matter of taking these concepts and saying, do I understand them? Can I implement something along the way? So anyway, good stuff in these 2 chapters. May take you a little longer. Hopefully you give it the time that it needs. The nice thing about working on it a little ahead of the due date, and I know I sound like a teacher here, is that you can reach out for help, because if you're waiting until that night and you run into something, it's hard to get my help and your fellow students. So working ahead is really beneficial. Okay. All right, enough from me. I will see you because I leave for New York tomorrow because I'm recording this in week 9. So I'll see you after I get back, so to speak. Have a good one. Bye.